The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot across the dusty town square of Sweetwater Creek, Texas, in the sweltering summer of 1873, sealing the fate of the youngest Fraser sister as tears streamed down her face. Georgina Fraser, barely 18, was the third of the sisters to be sold that day, her slender shoulders trembling as she stood upon the wooden auction block, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangles around her dirt-smudged face. Sold, to the gentleman in the black hat, for $80. The auctioneer bellowed, pointing to a leering man with tobacco-stained teeth. The crowd had thinned considerably since the first sister had been sold 2 hours earlier. Few had stayed to witness all 3 Fraser girls being auctioned off to pay their late father's substantial debts. Those who remained were either looking for cheap labor or had more sinister intentions. Just as the man in the black hat stepped forward to claim his purchase, a commanding voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. $500 for the girl. A hush fell over the square as Ethan Oberlin guided his stallion through the parting crowd. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a winter sky, he sat straight-backed in his saddle. His black coat was free of dust despite the long ride, and the silver buckle of his gun belt caught the afternoon sunlight. The auctioneer's eyes widened at the sum. $500. I've already sold the girl to this gentleman for $600, Ethan interrupted, dismounting with fluid grace. Now see here, the man in the black hat protested. I won fair and $700, Ethan said, his voice deceptively soft as he approached the auction block. For all 3 Fraser sisters. The auctioneer's jaw went slack. All 3, but sir, the other 2 have already been sold this afternoon, I am aware. Ethan reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch. $700 for the girl here, and I'll pay double whatever you got for the other 2. I'll also throw in an extra $100 for your trouble in retrieving them from their buyers. He tossed the pouch to the auctioneer, who caught it with fumbling hands. The weight of gold inside was unmistakable. But Mr. Oberlin, they've already left with. Then I suggest you start sending riders after them. Ethan's gaze hardened. Now, Georgina stared at the stranger who had just spent a small fortune on her and her sisters. Hope and fear warred within her chest. Being purchased by a wealthy man could mean anything from a life of domestic servitude to something far worse. Sir, she ventured, her voice barely audible. My sisters. Ethan Oberlin turned to her, and for the first time his stern expression softened. Miss Fraser, I have no intention of separating you from your sisters. You have my word they'll be returned to you before nightfall. 3 hours later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a carriage and a rider approached Ethan Oberlin's modest hotel. Georgina, who had been provided a small room to wash and change into clean clothes, rushed to the window at the sound of wheels on gravel. The carriage door swung open, and 2 young women stepped out, their faces registering shock and then overwhelming relief as they spotted their youngest sister running down the hotel steps. Grace! Gabriella! Georgina cried, flinging herself into her eldest sister's arms. Grace Fraser, 23, with the same honey-blonde hair as Georgina but with eyes of deep green rather than blue, clutched her sister tightly, her body shaking with silent sobs. Gabriella, the middle sister at 20, joined the embrace, her copper-tinged blonde hair falling over her sister's as they clung to each other. I thought I'd never see you again, Gabriella whispered, her voice breaking. How is this possible? Grace asked, pulling back to look at her youngest sister's face. The man who bought me said someone paid triple what he'd spent to release me from my contract. That would be me, Ethan said, stepping out of the hotel. Ethan Oberlin, ladies. I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. The three sisters turned to face him, still holding on to each other as if afraid they might be separated again at any moment. "Why would you do this?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the tears staining her cheeks. "What do you want from us?" "A fair question," Ethan acknowledged with a slight nod. "I'm looking for staff for my ranch about 20 miles north of here. I need a housekeeper, a cook, and someone with a good head for figures to help with the accounts. I was in town to inquire at the employment office when I heard about the auction." The sisters exchanged wary glances. "So we're to be your servants?" Gabriella asked, her chin lifting defiantly. "You're to be employees," Ethan corrected. "With fair wages, proper accommodations, and the freedom to leave if you wish once you've worked off the cost of your purchase. I've had the hotel prepare rooms for you tonight. We'll leave for the ranch tomorrow morning if that's acceptable." Grace, ever the practical one, studied the man carefully. "We have little choice, Mr. Oberlin, but I thank you for keeping us together. That alone is worth whatever service you require." Ethan's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "No one should be separated from family, Miss Fraser, not if it can be helped." He turned to go back inside, then paused. "Dinner will be served in the hotel dining room in an hour. Please join me if you feel up to it." As he disappeared into the hotel, the sisters huddled closer together. "Can we trust him?" Gabriella whispered. Grace watched the doorway where Ethan had vanished. "I don't know, but he didn't have to bring us back together. That has to count for something." "He seems different from most men," Georgina observed. "Did you see his eyes? There's kindness there, I think." "Perhaps," Grace conceded. "But kindness in a man's eyes doesn't always translate to kindness in his actions. We'll need to be cautious." "At least we're together," Gabriella said firmly. "Whatever happens, we face it as one." The following morning dawned clear and bright, the Texas sky an endless expanse of blue. The Fraser sisters, dressed in the simple but clean clothing Ethan had provided, waited outside the hotel with their meager possessions bundled into carpet bags. Ethan arrived with a wagon and a driver, as well as 3 horses tied to the back. "I thought you might prefer to ride rather than sit in the wagon all day," he explained, noting the sisters' surprised expressions. "Unless you don't ride, we ride," Grace confirmed. "Our father taught us when we were young." Something that might have been approval flickered across Ethan's face. "Good. The journey will be more pleasant that way." As they traveled north, the landscape gradually transformed from flat plains to rolling hills dotted with clusters of oak and mesquite. The sisters rode side by side, occasionally exchanging whispered conversations, while Ethan rode slightly ahead, giving them space. "What do you make of him?" Gabriella asked her sisters, keeping her voice low. Grace studied the straight line of Ethan's shoulders. "He's a mystery." "Why would a man spend so much money on 3 women he's never met?" "Perhaps he's lonely," Georgina suggested. "He said his ranch is 20 miles from town." "That's a long way from any company." "Or perhaps he has other plans for us," Grace said grimly. "We should remain vigilant." By midday, the heat had become intense, and Ethan called a halt near a small creek shaded by cottonwood trees. The driver, an older man named Jasper, set out a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "We should reach the ranch by late afternoon," Ethan informed them as they ate. "My foreman's wife, Mrs. Holliday, has prepared rooms for you in the main house." "You mentioned needing a housekeeper, a cook, and someone for accounts," Grace said carefully. "Did you have specific roles in mind for each of us?" Ethan took a sip from his canteen before answering. "I thought we might determine that based on your skills and preferences." "What were your responsibilities before your father's passing?" The The sisters exchanged surprised glances at his consideration. "I manage the household accounts and correspondence," Grace replied. "Our father was a merchant, but his eyesight was failing in recent years." "I did most of the cooking," Gabriella added, "and helped with the inventory at the store." "I tended the garden and assisted customers," Georgina said softly. "I also have some skill with sewing and mending." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "It seems your experiences align well with what's needed. We can try those arrangements initially and adjust if necessary." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I should tell you that my ranch is not what you might expect." Grace tensed. "What do you mean? The Circle isn't just a cattle operation. It's also a horse ranch specializing in breeding and training quarter horses. And," he hesitated, "it serves as a safe haven for those who need one." "A safe haven," Gabriella echoed, "for women and children escaping difficult situations," Ethan clarified. "Sometimes men who have been wrongly accused or are running from unjust persecution. I provide temporary shelter, work if they want it, and help them establish new lives elsewhere if needed." The sisters stared at him in astonishment. "You're telling us you run some sort of underground railroad for people in trouble?" Grace asked incredulously. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Something like that. I thought you should know before we arrive. Some of my guests have experienced significant trauma. They may be wary of newcomers." "Why are you sharing this with us?" Grace pressed. "Surely such an operation requires discretion." Ethan's gaze met hers directly. "Because I saw how you protected your sisters at the auction block, Miss Fraser. Even when you were being sold yourself, your eyes were searching the crowd for them. People who value family that highly generally understand the importance of protecting the vulnerable." Grace felt a flush of warmth at his words but maintained her composure. "You've taken quite a risk, Mr. Oberlin." "Life is risk, Miss Fraser," he replied simply. "Now, shall we continue? We have several hours of riding ahead of us." As they mounted their horses, Georgina maneuvered her mare beside her eldest sister. "He's not what I expected," she whispered. Grace watched as Ethan conferred with Jasper about their route. "No," she agreed quietly. "He's not." The Circle O Ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Unlike many of the sprawling, ostentatious ranches owned by wealthy Texans, Ethan's property had a functional, understated elegance. The main house was a two-story structure built of local limestone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several smaller cabins were scattered nearby, and beyond them stood a large barn and corral where horses of exceptional quality grazed. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Plump and gray-haired, with a face creased by both laughter and sorrow, she hurried down the steps to greet them. "Thank the Lord you're back safely," she called to Ethan. "And these must be the Fraser sisters." She smiled warmly at them. "I'm Martha Holliday. Welcome to Circle O." Martha's genuine welcome eased some of the tension the sisters had been carrying. They dismounted, and stable hands appeared to take their horses. "Mrs. Holliday has prepared rooms for you upstairs," Ethan told them. "She'll show you around and answer any questions you might have. I need to check on some business, but I'll see you at dinner." As he strode toward the barn, Martha clucked sympathetically. "You poor dears must be exhausted. Come along inside where it's cool and I'll show you to your rooms." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable without being luxurious. Polished wooden floors, simple but well-crafted furniture, and large windows that allowed light and air to circulate freely gave the place a welcoming atmosphere. "Mr. Oberlin said you were sold at auction," Martha said as she led them upstairs. "Such a barbaric practice. The bank did the same to my sister's family when her husband died, though they called it a debt reconciliation sale. Mr. Oberlin happened to be passing through that town too." She smiled fondly. "He has a habit of being in the right place at the right time." "How long have you worked here?" Grace asked, curious about this woman who seemed so at ease in Ethan Oberlin's home. "Going on 5 years now. My husband Silas is the foreman. We came here after losing our farm to drought." Martha paused at the top of the stairs. "Mr. Oberlin gave us purpose again when we thought all was lost." She showed them to 3 adjoining rooms, each with a comfortable bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the property. "The washroom is at the end of the hall," Martha informed them. "Hot water is brought up every morning and evening, but if you need it at other times, just ask. Dinner is at 6 in the main dining room. There's only one rule: Mr. Oberlin insists upon everyone eats together, no matter their station." After Martha left them to settle in, the sisters gathered in Grace's room. "What do you think?" Grace asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Gabriella ran her hand over the simple quilt. "It's nicer than I expected, and Mrs. Holliday seems genuine in her regard for Mr. Oberlin." "Did you notice there are no locks on the doors?" Georgina pointed out. "Yes," Grace acknowledged, "but that doesn't necessarily mean anything sinister. This is still a working ranch, not a prison." "I wonder who else lives here," Gabriella mused. "If Mr. Oberlin really does take in people in need, we might not be the only new arrivals." Grace stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch below. She could see Ethan in the distance, talking with a man who must be Silas Holliday. Even from this distance, there was something compelling about Ethan's presence, an air of quiet authority that drew the eye. "We should clean up for dinner," she said, turning back to her sisters. "And remember, we need to be observant. Mr. Oberlin may seem different from other men, but we've been fooled before." When the sisters descended to the dining room that evening, they found a gathering of about 15 people already seated around a long table. Ethan sat at the head, with an empty chair to his right. He rose when the sisters entered. "Ladies, please join us," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "I'd like to introduce you to everyone." He proceeded to name each person at the table: Silas and Martha Holliday, Miguel, the head wrangler, and his wife Alina, Thomas, the blacksmith, Dr. Sarah Collins, a woman physician who visited the ranch twice a month, and several others whose roles on the ranch were less clear, but who all had an air of having weathered difficult times. "And these are our newest guests," Ethan said, indicating a woman of around 30 with a bruised face and 2 small children clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Rebecca Turner and her children, James and Eliza. They arrived yesterday." The way the woman flinched when Ethan gestured toward her told Grace all she needed to know about why Mrs. Turner might be seeking sanctuary. "We're pleased to meet you all," Grace said, speaking for her sisters. "I'm Grace Fraser, and these are my sisters Gabriella and Georgina." As they took their seats, Grace found herself placed to Ethan's right. She glanced at him questioningly. "I hope you don't mind," he said quietly. "I thought we might discuss your duties while we eat." The dinner was simple but plentiful. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that must have come from the garden visible from Grace's bedroom window. The conversation around the table flowed easily, with none of the stilted formality Grace had expected given the diverse backgrounds of those present. "Your ranch seems to run smoothly, Mr. Oberlin," Grace observed as the meal progressed. "How long have you been established here?" "Almost 7 years," Ethan replied. "I came to Texas after the war with little more than my horse and the clothes on my back." "Were you a soldier?" Gabriella asked from across the table. A shadow passed over Ethan's face. "I was, Confederate cavalry, though not by choice. Texas was my home. Yet you help people regardless of where they're from, Grace noted. Ethan met her gaze steadily. The war taught me that suffering doesn't recognize boundaries or allegiances, neither should compassion. After dinner, Ethan invited Grace to join him in his study, while her sisters helped Martha clear the table despite her protests that guests shouldn't be working on their first night. The study was a reflection of the man himself, orderly, unpretentious, with bookshelves lining one wall and a desk positioned to catch the natural light from the window during the day. A map of Texas and the surrounding territories was pinned to another wall, with various locations marked in red. "Please sit," Ethan said, gesturing to a chair near the unlit fireplace. He remained standing, moving to pour 2 small glasses of amber liquid from a decanter on a side table. "Brandy, it's been a long day." Grace hesitated, then accepted the glass. "Thank you." Ethan took the seat opposite her, studying her over the rim of his glass. "You have questions?" It wasn't a question, but Grace nodded anyway. "Several, starting with why you really bought us at that auction." Ethan took a sip of his brandy before answering. "I told you the truth. I need help running the household aspects of the ranch, especially with the number of guests we often have. But that doesn't explain why you would spend so much money on 3 unknown women when you could have hired help through conventional means." Ethan set his glass down. "When I saw the 3 of you being auctioned separately, it reminded me of something that happened during the war. I was part of a unit that captured a family trying to flee north, a mother and her 3 daughters. My commanding officer ordered them separated and sold to different buyers." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I was too much of a coward to stop it then. I've regretted that failure every day since." Grace's expression softened slightly. "So purchasing us was some form of atonement?" "Perhaps," Ethan admitted, "but it's also practical. I do need help, and from what I observed, you and your sisters are intelligent, capable women who have already faced significant hardship with dignity." "We had little choice but to be dignified," Grace said with a touch of bitterness. "After our father died, we discovered he had mortgaged everything to cover gambling debts. The bank foreclosed on our home and store immediately. We had nowhere to go, no relatives to take us in." "I'm sorry for your loss," Ethan said sincerely. "Both of your father and your security." Grace took a sip of brandy, welcoming the warm burn that followed. "What exactly would my responsibilities entail here?" "As I mentioned, I need someone to manage the household accounts and correspondence. The ranch business is growing, and with the additional guests we often house, the paperwork has become unwieldy. Silas handles the ranch operations, but the household and the care of our visitors would benefit from your oversight." "And my sisters?" "Based on what you told me earlier, Gabriella would oversee the kitchen, though Martha will help her learn our routines and Georgina could assist with the sewing, gardening, and general household tasks. Of course, if they have other preferences or skills, we can adjust accordingly." Grace considered his words. "And our compensation? You mentioned working off the cost of our purchase. I'll pay you a fair monthly wage, part of which will go toward that cost. You'll also have room and board, of course. Once the debt is cleared, the full wage is yours to keep or save as you choose." "How long would that take?" Ethan met her gaze directly. "At the rate I'm proposing, about 2 years. However, if you wish to leave sooner and can secure employment elsewhere, I won't hold you to the debt." Grace's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's unusually generous." "It's just," Ethan corrected. "I don't believe in keeping people against their will, no matter the circumstances." Grace studied him thoughtfully. "There's more to you than meets the eye, Mr. Oberlin." "I could say the same about you, Miss Fraser." He finished his brandy and set the glass aside. "Do you have other questions?" Just one for now, Grace said, her voice softening slightly. Those people at dinner, the ones who aren't regular ranch hands, how long do they typically stay? It varies. Some for a few days, others for months. Mrs. Turner and her children will likely be with us for some time, at least until her husband stops searching for her. Ethan's expression darkened. He's the sheriff in a town about 50 miles from here. Makes things complicated. Grace's eyes widened. You're harboring a sheriff's wife. That's dangerous. Many worthwhile things are, Ethan replied simply. Now, it's getting late and you've had a trying few days. We can discuss any other details tomorrow after you've had a proper rest. As Grace rose to leave, she paused at the door. Mr. Oberlin, why did you tell me about Mrs. Turner's situation? You hardly know me. Ethan's gaze was steady. Because I'm trusting you with the welfare of this household, Miss Fraser. That includes understanding the risks we sometimes take. Grace nodded slowly. Good night, Mr. Oberlin. Good night, Miss Fraser. I look forward to working with you. As Grace made her way upstairs, her mind whirled with impressions of Ethan Oberlin. He was unlike any man she had encountered, principled yet pragmatic, authoritative yet considerate. And beneath his composed exterior, she sensed depths of experience that had shaped him in profound ways. Her sisters were waiting in her room, eager for details. Well, Gabriella demanded as soon as Grace closed the door. What did he say? Grace relayed the conversation, watching their expressions shift from concern to cautious optimism. It sounds too good to be true, Gabriella said skeptically. Perhaps, Grace conceded, but Mrs. Holliday seems genuinely fond of him and the other ranch residents appear well treated. For now, I think we should accept the positions he's offering while remaining alert to any signs of deception. I like him, Georgina declared softly. He has kind eyes. Grace smiled at her youngest sister's romantic nature. Kind eyes or not, we'll need to be practical. This arrangement gives us time to plan our future, whatever that might be. At least we're together, Gabriella said, echoing her words from the day before. That's what matters most. As the sisters embraced before retiring to their separate rooms, Grace found herself thinking of Ethan's words about family and protection. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had found not just employment but a temporary sanctuary in this unexpected place. Over the next few weeks, the Fraser sisters settled into life at the Circle O Ranch. Grace took over management of the household accounts and correspondence, discovering that Ethan's business affairs were more extensive than she had initially realized. Besides the cattle and horse operations, he had investments in several businesses in nearby towns, and maintained correspondence with a network of individuals who helped relocate those seeking refuge at the ranch. Gabriella flourished in the kitchen, working alongside Martha to prepare meals for the ever-changing household. Her natural creativity with food impressed even the most seasoned ranch hands, and Ethan made a point of complimenting her innovations at dinner. Georgina found her place tending the vegetable garden and assisting Rebecca Turner with her children. Her gentle nature and patience made her a favorite among the youngest residents, and she often spent evenings reading to the children or teaching them simple crafts. As summer progressed, the sisters began to relax their guard, finding unexpected contentment in their new roles. The fear that had haunted them since their father's death slowly receded, replaced by a growing sense of security. One evening in late August, Grace was working in the study, reviewing the ranch's ledgers when Ethan returned from a 3-day trip to Austin. He paused in the doorway, observing her for a moment before she noticed his presence. "Mr. Oberlin," she said, looking up with a start. "I didn't hear you come in." "I just arrived," he replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. Though dusty from the road, he still carried himself with that quiet dignity that Grace had come to admire. "How have things been in my absence?" "Quite well." Miguel delivered the horses to the Thornton Ranch as scheduled, and Dr. Collins stopped by to check on Mrs. Turner's injuries. "They're healing nicely." She hesitated, then added, "We also received a letter that might concern you." She handed him an envelope addressed in a bold, angular hand. "It arrived yesterday." The sender identified himself as Marshal James Turner. Ethan's expression tightened as he took the letter. "Rebecca's husband." He broke the seal and quickly scanned the contents, his jaw clenching. "He's coming to search for her," Grace guessed, observing his reaction. "Yes, he claims to have information that she might be in this area." Ethan refolded the letter and tucked it into his vest pocket. "I'll need to make arrangements to move her and the children to our contact in New Mexico sooner than planned. Is there anything I can do to help?" Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "Actually, yes. We'll need to create a distraction when the marshal arrives. Something to occupy his attention while Rebecca and the children are transported safely away from the ranch." Grace raised an eyebrow. "What kind of distraction did you have in mind?" "I was thinking we might host a dinner party. Invite some of the prominent ranchers and businessmen from the area. The marshal would be hard-pressed to conduct a thorough search with 24 witnesses present." "A social gathering could work," Grace agreed, her mind already turning to the logistics. "When do you expect him?" "The letter is dated 4 days ago. Given the postal routes, I'd estimate we have 3 or 4 days at most." Grace nodded decisively. "I'll speak with Gabriella about the menu and have invitations sent out tomorrow morning. We can use the pretext of celebrating the successful horse sale to the Thorntons." Ethan studied her with something like admiration. "You don't seem particularly troubled by the prospect of deceiving a law enforcement officer." "A badge doesn't make a man, just Mr. Oberlin," Grace replied evenly. "I've seen the marks on Rebecca's back. No one deserves such treatment, least of all from someone sworn to protect others." A smile touched the corners of Ethan's mouth. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Fraser." "As do you, Mr. Oberlin." Grace gathered her papers, suddenly aware of the late hour and their solitude in the study. "I should retire for the night. We'll have much to prepare tomorrow." "Of course." Ethan stepped aside to let her pass, but as she moved past him, he spoke again. "Grace." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Yes, thank you, for understanding what we're trying to accomplish here." The sincerity in his blue eyes made her breath catch slightly. "You're welcome, Ethan." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as preparations for the dinner party consumed the household. Invitations were dispatched. The house was thoroughly cleaned, and Gabriella planned an elaborate menu to impress their guests. Rebecca and her children were moved to one of the more remote cabins on the property, with Sela's holiday standing guard while arrangements were finalized for their journey to New Mexico. On the morning of the party, Grace was supervising the arrangement of flowers in the dining room when Ethan found her. "Marshal Turner has been spotted in town," he said without preamble. "One of our hands saw him asking questions at the general store." Grace straightened, her hands stilling on the vase she'd been adjusting. "How long do we have?" "A few hours at most. I've sent Miguel to escort Rebecca and the children to the meeting point where our contact will take them the rest of the way to New Mexico." "Good." Grace glanced around the room, mentally reviewing their preparations. The first guest should arrive around 5. If the marshal follows the directions he'll inevitably receive in town, he should reach us just as dinner is being served. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "I've instructed the hands to be vigilant but not obviously so. We don't want to arouse suspicion." "What about my sisters?" Should they know what's happening, Gabriella will be busy in the kitchen, and Georgina has agreed to help entertain the children of our guests. They'll be safer not knowing the details for now. Grace bit her lip, torn between protecting her sisters from worry and keeping them informed of potential danger. Ethan seemed to sense her conflict. I promise you, Grace, I won't let any harm come to them, or to you. The intensity in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. I know, she said softly, surprised to realize she truly meant it. The first guests began arriving shortly after 5 o'clock, a mix of neighboring ranchers, merchants from town, and their wives. Ethan greeted each arrival with the polished manners of a practiced host, while Grace circulated among the guests, ensuring everyone had refreshments and was properly introduced. By 6:30, the large dining room was filled with conversation and laughter, as 20 guests enjoyed Gabriella's expertly prepared feast. Georgina had organized games for the children in the adjacent sitting room, their delighted squeals occasionally rising above the adult conversations. Grace was just beginning to relax when she noticed Ethan straighten in his chair at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on something beyond the dining room windows. Following his gaze, she saw a dust cloud approaching on the main road to the ranch. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan announced, rising to his feet with a glass in hand. I'd like to propose a toast to the continued prosperity of our community and the friendship that binds us together. As the guests lifted their glasses, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, followed by the crunch of boots on the porch steps. A moment later, a hard knock sounded at the front door. Martha Holliday, who had been supervising the serving of dessert, moved to answer it, but Ethan gestured for her to continue her duties. I'll see to our unexpected visitor, he said smoothly, his tone giving no hint of concern. Grace's heart pounded as Ethan left the dining room. The conversation around the table continued, none of the guests seeming to notice anything amiss, but Grace found herself straining to hear the exchange at the front door. A few minutes later, Ethan returned with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a marshal's uniform. The newcomer's cold gray eyes scanned the room with calculated precision. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the interruption, Ethan said pleasantly. This is Marshal James Turner from Pine Ridge. He's tracking some fugitives and has requested permission to search the property. Murmurs of curiosity rippled through the gathering. Marshal, as you can see, we're in the midst of a celebration, Ethan continued. You're welcome to join us for dessert while my foreman escorts you around the property afterward. Turner's gaze locked on Grace, who met it steadily despite the chill it sent down her spine. Here was a man accustomed to using his authority to intimidate. Much obliged, Mr. Oberlin, the marshal replied, his voice surprisingly soft for such an imposing figure. But I won't intrude on your gathering for long. I'm looking for a woman and 2 young children who may have passed through this area. The woman is my wife, who has unfortunately become confused in recent months. I'm concerned for her safety and that of our children. Grace fought to keep her expression neutral, though disgust churned in her stomach at the man's smooth lies. I don't recall seeing anyone matching that description, Ethan said, his tone conversational. But you're welcome to speak with my staff and hands. Perhaps one of them might have noticed something. The marshal's cold smile never reached his eyes. I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Oberlin. I understand you take in various guests at your ranch, an admirable charitable endeavor. The slight emphasis he placed on guests made it clear he knew exactly what kind of sanctuary the Circle provided. We try to be good neighbors, Ethan replied evenly. Now, won't you at least have some coffee before you begin your search, Mrs. Fraser? Would you mind asking your sister to prepare a cup for our visitor? Grace rose gracefully, recognizing Ethan's strategy to get her out of the marshal's sight. Of course. Please excuse me. In the kitchen, she found Gabriella supervising the plating of apple tarts. We have a situation, Grace whispered urgently. The marshal is here looking for Rebecca and the children. Gabriella's eyes widened. Are they safe? On their way to New Mexico, according to Ethan. The marshal wants coffee. Can you prepare it while I find Georgina? I want to make sure she knows not to mention Rebecca to anyone. Of course. Be careful, Grace. Grace slipped out of the kitchen and made her way to the sitting room where Georgina was teaching the children to play a game involving string figures. She looked up with a bright smile that faded when she saw Grace's expression. What's wrong? She asked, rising to meet her sister at the door. Grace quickly explained the situation, keeping her voice low enough that the children couldn't overhear. If the marshal questions you, just say you've been too busy with the household to notice visitors coming or going. The less detail, the better. Georgina nodded, her blue eyes serious. I understand. Should I keep the children here? Yes, that would be best. The further they are from the marshal, the better. Returning to the dining room, Grace found that many of the guests had moved to the adjoining parlor for after-dinner drinks, while Ethan and Marshal Turner remained seated at the table, engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation, but which Grace recognized as a subtle battle of wills. Ah, Miss Fraser, Ethan said as she approached. Marshal Turner was just telling me about his distinguished career in law enforcement. How fascinating, Grace said, taking a seat beside Ethan. You must have many interesting stories, Marshal. Turner's cold gaze assessed her with unsettling thoroughness. You're new to the area, Miss Fraser. I don't recall seeing you on my previous visits to this part of the county. My sisters and I arrived about a month ago, Grace replied, maintaining a polite smile. Mr. Oberlin kindly offered us employment after our father's passing left us in reduced circumstances. 3 sisters, you say? Turner's eyes narrowed slightly. And all of you work here at the ranch? Yes, Grace confirmed, her heart rate accelerating at his interest. We're fortunate to have found such a respectable position. Before Turner could question her further, Gabriella arrived with coffee. The marshal accepted the cup with a nod of thanks but didn't drink it, instead setting it aside as he rose to his feet. I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Oberlin, but I should begin my search before it gets any darker. Ethan stood as well. Of course, Silas will show you around the property. As the 2 men left the dining room, Grace exchanged a worried glance with Gabriella. Go back to the kitchen, she whispered. Try to act normally. For the next hour, Grace moved among the guests, making conversation and ensuring everyone was comfortable, all while acutely aware of the marshal's presence on the property. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of him and Silas through the windows as they inspected the outbuildings and cabins. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Ethan and the marshal returned to the house. Most of the guests had departed, leaving only a few neighbors engaged in a card game in the parlor. Grace was helping Martha collect glasses when they entered. Well, Mr. Oberlin, it appears my information was incorrect, Turner said, his voice carrying a hint of suppressed anger. I appreciate your cooperation. Always happy to assist an officer of the law, Ethan replied smoothly. I hope you find your family soon. Turner's jaw tightened at Ethan's deliberate emphasis on the word family. I'm sure I will. They can't have gone far, not without help. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Grace for a moment before returning to Ethan. You've built quite a reputation in these parts, Mr. Oberlin. A man who helps those in need, regardless of their circumstances. A noble calling. I believe in second chances, Marshal, as do I. Turner placed his hat on his head, adjusting it with deliberate precision. "But I also believe in justice. Sooner or later, everyone faces the consequences of their choices." The threat in his words was unmistakable. "Safe travels, Marshal," Ethan said calmly, showing him to the door. "The road back to Pine Ridge can be treacherous after dark." After Turner's departure, an almost palpable tension lifted from the house. The remaining guests left shortly afterward, complimenting Grace and Gabriella on the evening's success before heading into the night. When the last carriage had disappeared down the drive, Grace found Ethan on the front porch, staring after Turner's distant figure. "You think he suspects?" she asked quietly, joining him at the railing. "He knows," Ethan replied grimly. "He doesn't have proof, but he knows." "Will he return?" Ethan turned to look at her, his expression softening in the lantern light. "Not immediately. He'll try to track Rebecca and the children through other means first. By the time he exhausts those options, they'll be safely established in New Mexico under new names." Grace nodded, relief washing through her. "Thank you for what you did for them." "I should be thanking you," Ethan said, surprising her. "Your quick thinking and composure made the evening's charade possible." "It wasn't difficult to play hostess to a dinner party," Grace demurred. "It is when you're doing it to deceive a dangerous man who's searching for his abused wife." Ethan's voice was quiet but intense. "You showed remarkable courage, Grace." She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, and the way the night air carried the scent of his shaving soap mixed with leather and horses. "I've discovered I'm braver than I thought when protecting those who need it." Something shifted in Ethan's gaze, a warmth that hadn't been there before. For a moment, Grace thought he might say more or perhaps even move closer, but instead he straightened and stepped back. "It's late, and it's been a trying day. You should get some rest." Grace felt a flicker of disappointment but nodded. "Good night, Ethan." As she turned to go inside, his voice stopped her. "Grace," she looked back over her shoulder. "Yes, I'm glad you and your sisters came to Circle O." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet sincerity, sent a rush of warmth through her that lingered long after she'd retired to her room. The weeks that followed saw a gradual shift in the relationship between Ethan and the Fraser sisters, particularly Grace. What had begun as an employer-employee arrangement evolved into something closer to partnership, as Grace's management skills proved invaluable to the ranch's operations. Ethan increasingly sought her counsel on business matters, and they often spent evenings in the study, discussing everything from horse breeding strategies to the complex network of safe houses Ethan had established across 3 states. Grace found herself looking forward to these conversations, not just for the intellectual stimulation but for the opportunity to learn more about the enigmatic man who had so unexpectedly changed her life. "I never asked how you came to own this ranch," Grace said one evening in late September, as they reviewed correspondence over glasses of brandy. "You mentioned coming to Texas after the war with nothing but your horse and clothes." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a story that requires more brandy." He refilled their glasses before continuing. "The previous owner of this property was a Union sympathizer named Howard Grant. During the war, his neighbors made life difficult for him and his wife, refusing to do business with them, even threatening violence at times. That must have been terrifying for them." It was. When Grant's son was killed fighting for the Union, he and his wife decided to return to Pennsylvania. But they couldn't sell the ranch. No one would buy from a Yankee lover, as they called him. Ethan took a sip of brandy. "I met Grant purely by chance in a general store about 30 miles from here. I was looking for work, any work, and overheard him telling the shopkeeper he needed help transporting some belongings. So you offered your services, Grace guessed. Ethan nodded. I escorted them to the nearest rail station, helping to protect their wagon from robbers and other threats. During the journey, Grant and I talked a great deal. He was a good man who'd suffered much for his convictions. And he eventually sold you the ranch. Not exactly. Ethan smiled at the memory. When we reached the station, he handed me the deed to the property and a letter granting me ownership. Said he'd rather give it to someone who'd fought on the opposite side but showed him kindness than sell it to neighbors who'd turned against him over politics. Grace's eyes widened. He simply gave you a ranch, he did. I tried to refuse, it seemed too much, but he insisted it was what he and his wife wanted. Make something good of it, he told me, something that matters. And you have, Grace said softly. You've created a place of safety and new beginnings. Ethan's gaze met hers, intense and searching. It wasn't always easy. The locals were suspicious at first, a former Confederate soldier taking over a Union sympathizer's property. It took time to earn their trust. Yet now you're respected throughout the county, Grace observed. Even Marshal Turner acknowledged your reputation. Respect is useful, Ethan said with a slight shrug. It provides cover for the work that truly matters, helping people like Rebecca Turner and her children. Yes, Ethan swirled the brandy in his glass, and people like you and your sisters. Grace felt a flutter in her chest at his words. We're hardly in the same situation as Rebecca. We weren't fleeing abuse. Weren't you? Ethan's expression was gentle. Perhaps not physical abuse, but you were certainly victims of circumstance and a system that treats women as property to be auctioned to the highest bidder. Grace couldn't argue with his assessment. True enough, though I sometimes wonder if we've merely exchanged one form of dependency for another. How so? We're still reliant on your goodwill, Ethan, working to repay a debt that you yourself say will take years to clear. Ethan set down his glass, his expression becoming serious. Grace, I want to be clear about something. You and your sisters are not indentured servants here. If at any point you wish to leave together or separately, you are free to do so. The debt is an accounting fiction as far as I'm concerned. Grace stared at him, surprised by both his words and the intensity with which he delivered them. Then, why maintain the pretense at all? Because I thought it might be easier for you to accept help if it came with the structure of a business arrangement rather than charity. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Grace had come to recognize as a sign of genuine emotion breaking through his usual composure. I had no right to make that assumption. I apologize. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Grace. No apology needed. You've been more than fair with us, Ethan. More than fair. Then stay because you want to, not because you feel obligated, he said quietly. The Circle O is better for having you here, all of you. Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment, Grace felt as though something unspoken passed between them, something that made her heart beat faster and her cheeks grow warm. Before she could respond, a knock at the study door broke the moment. Georgina entered, her expression anxious. I'm sorry to interrupt, but a rider just arrived. He says it's urgent. Ethan was on his feet immediately. Where is he? In the kitchen. Martha's giving him something to eat. He looks exhausted, like he's been riding hard for days. Ethan and Grace exchanged concerned glances before following Georgina to the kitchen, where they found a young man in dust-covered clothes hunched over a bowl of stew. He looked up as they entered, his face haggard with fatigue. Mr. Oberlin. I'm David Winters. Jacob Reed in Fort Worth sent me. There's trouble. The name Jacob Reed meant nothing to Grace, but Ethan's expression tightened at its mention. What kind of trouble? He asked, pulling out a chair across from the young man. Marshal Turner's formed a posse. They're not just looking for his wife, anymore they're targeting all the safe houses in the network. 3 have already been raided in the past week. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the back of the chair. Casualties: 2 men killed resisting arrest in Dallas. Several others taken into custody, including women and children. David lowered his voice. Turner's claiming he's breaking up a criminal conspiracy that's harboring fugitives from justice. How did he discover the other safe houses? Grace asked, her mind racing with implications. David shook his head wearily. No one knows for sure. Jacob thinks someone in the network might have been caught and forced to talk. Ethan's expression was grim. How much time do we have? A few days at most. Jacob said to tell you that Turner's gathered a force of about 15 men deputies and hired guns, and they're moving systematically through the region. The Circle O is likely on their list. Grace felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. What will you do? Ethan straightened, his decision already made. We evacuate. Everyone who might be at risk needs to be moved immediately. Silas and Martha can take the most vulnerable to the caverns in the North Pasture until we can arrange more permanent relocation. What about the ranch? Gabriella asked, having joined them from where she'd been preparing the next day's bread. I'm not abandoning Circle O, Ethan said firmly, but I need to make sure everyone else is safe first. Grace touched his arm. We'll help. Tell us what to do. The night that followed was one of controlled chaos, as the ranch's residents prepared for evacuation. The 3 current guests, a young couple fleeing a false accusation of theft, and an elderly black man who had defended his granddaughter from a white attacker, were loaded into a wagon with supplies for a journey to the next safe house in the network, located over 100 miles away in a remote corner of the territory. By dawn, the only people remaining at the Circle O were Ethan, Silas, and Martha Holliday, Miguel and his wife, the Fraser sisters, and 2 ranch hands who had fought alongside Ethan in the war and refused to leave his side. The ranch looks too empty, Georgina observed as they gathered for a hasty breakfast. Won't that make Marshal Turner suspicious when he arrives? That's why we're going to make it look like business as usual, Ethan explained. Miguel will run the horses in the south pasture, visible from the main road. Silas and the hands will work the cattle. Martha and you girls will continue your normal routines in the house. While you do what? Grace asked, noticing he hadn't included himself in the plan. Ethan's expression was resolute. I'm going to meet Turner before he reaches the ranch, try to reason with him. That's too dangerous, Grace protested. You heard what David said. Turner's already responsible for 2 deaths. He's not interested in reason. I have to try, Ethan insisted. This is my fight, not yours. It became our fight the moment we chose to stay here, Grace countered, her voice rising with emotion. The moment we helped Rebecca and her children escape. We're all part of this now, Ethan. The others around the table nodded in agreement, their faces showing the same determination. Ethan looked at each of them in turn, his expression softening. I appreciate your loyalty more than I can say, but I won't risk your safety unnecessarily. Then don't go alone, Grace urged. Take Silas and the others with you. No, Ethan said firmly. If I approach with armed men, it will only confirm Turner's accusations of a conspiracy. I need to speak to him man to man. Grace wanted to argue further, but the set of Ethan's jaw told her his mind was made up. When will you go? Within the hour. David said Turner's posse was last seen near Griffin Creek, which puts them about half a day's ride from here if they maintain their pace. After breakfast, as Ethan prepared his horse for the journey, Grace found him in the stable, checking the cinch on his saddle. I wish you wouldn't do this, she said quietly. Ethan turned to face her, his expression gentler than it had been at the breakfast table. I know, but sometimes confronting trouble directly is the only way to resolve it. And if Turner won't listen to reason, if he's determined to make an example of you, then at least I'll have bought time for everyone else to reach safety." He stepped closer, his blue eyes searching hers. "Grace, I need to ask something of you." "Anything," she replied without hesitation. "If I don't return by sundown, take your sisters and leave. Martha knows of a place in Colorado where you'll be safe. Promise me you won't stay here waiting for trouble to find you." The thought of leaving without knowing his fate was unbearable, but Grace nodded reluctantly. "I promise. But only if you promise to do everything in your power to return safely." "I promise." His hand reached out to touch her cheek briefly, a gesture so unexpected and tender that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "You've brought something to Circolo that I didn't realize was missing until you arrived." "What's that?" she whispered. "Hope," he said simply. "Hope for more than just survival." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and rode out of the stable, his straight-backed figure silhouetted against the morning sun. The hours that followed were among the longest of Grace's life. She moved through her duties mechanically, checking and rechecking the household accounts, organizing supplies, all while her mind remained focused on the road that Ethan had taken. By mid-afternoon, with no sign of Ethan's return, a sense of dread began to settle over the ranch. Silas positioned himself on the porch with a spyglass, scanning the horizon periodically while maintaining a pretense of whittling. "Anything?" Grace asked, joining him during a brief break from her tasks. The foreman shook his head, his weathered face betraying his concern. "Not yet, Miss Grace. But Mr. Ethan's a capable man. He knows how to handle himself." "I know," Grace said, trying to draw comfort from Silas's confidence. "But Marshal Turner seems determined to destroy everything Ethan has built." "Some men can't stand to see others doing good in the world," Silas replied, his voice low. "Reminds them too much of their own failings." As the afternoon waned into early evening, Grace gathered with her sisters in the kitchen, where Gabriella was preparing a simple supper that no one had much appetite for. "He should have been back by now," Georgina said anxiously, peering out the window for the 100th time. "Perhaps they're still talking," Gabriella suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "Negotiations can take time." Grace was about to respond when Martha Holliday burst through the door, her face pale. "Riders coming, at least a dozen, maybe more." Grace's heart sank. "Ethan?" Martha shook her head. "No sign of him. Silas says it's Turner's posse." The sisters exchanged alarmed glances. "What do we do?" Georgina asked, her voice trembling slightly. Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself as she remembered her promise to Ethan. "We stick to the plan. Act normally, as if this is just another day at the ranch. Martha, please tell Miguel and the hands to do the same." As Martha hurried out, Grace turned to her sisters. "If things go badly, we may need to leave quickly. Gabriella, pack some food that won't spoil. Georgina, gather our essential belongings, just what we can carry on horseback." "What about you?" Gabriella asked, already moving toward the pantry. "I'm going to meet Marshal Turner," Grace replied, squaring her shoulders. "As the household manager, it would be expected if Ethan is absent." "Grace, no," Georgina protested. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous if we all try to run with Turner's men surrounding the property," Grace countered. "I'll try to buy us time, find out what's happened to Ethan if I can." Before her sisters could argue further, the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices filled the yard. Grace moved to the window and saw Marshal Turner dismounting, flanked by a dozen hard-faced men. There was no sign of Ethan. "Stay inside," she instructed her sisters. "No matter what happens, stay inside until I come for you or Silas gives the signal to leave." Stepping onto the porch, Grace presented a picture of calm composure that belied the fear churning in her stomach. "Marshal Turner," she called, descending the steps to meet him. "This is an unexpected visit. I'm afraid Mr. Oberlin isn't here at present." Turner's cold gray eyes assessed her with clinical detachment. "Miss Fraser, I think we both know that's not entirely accurate." He gestured to two of his men, who moved toward a wagon parked at the side of the house. They returned moments later, half carrying, half dragging a figure between them. Grace's blood ran cold as she recognized Ethan, his face bruised and bloody, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "We encountered Mr. Oberlin on the road this morning," Turner explained with mock politeness. "He seemed eager to discuss my investigation into his network of illegal safe houses. Our conversation became heated." "What have you done to him?" Grace demanded, taking an involuntary step forward only to be blocked by one of Turner's men. "Nothing compared to what the law allows for harboring fugitives, interfering with a lawful arrest," and his voice hardened, "abducting a law officer's wife and children." Ethan lifted his head with effort, his eyes finding Grace's. "Don't engage," he managed through split lips. "Get everyone out." Turner backhanded him across the face. "Silence, you've said enough already." Grace flinched at the blow but forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "Marshal, whatever grievances you have against Mr. Oberlin, surely they can be addressed through proper legal channels. This display of force seems excessive." "Proper legal channels," Turner repeated with a humorless laugh. "Like the ones that allowed my wife to escape justice for theft and abandonment, the ones that have permitted Oberlin to operate his criminal enterprise for years." "Your wife was fleeing abuse, not justice," Grace said before she could stop herself. Turner's eyes narrowed dangerously. "So you admit you knew about her presence here. That makes you an accomplice, Miss Fraser." "I admit nothing except that your methods seem more suited to a tyrant than an officer of the law," Grace replied, lifting her chin defiantly. For a moment, Turner looked as though he might strike her as well, but instead he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down Grace's spine. "Search the house and outbuildings," he ordered his men. "Arrest anyone who resists. We're shutting down this operation permanently." As several men moved toward the house, Grace positioned herself at the foot of the steps. "Do you have a warrant, Marshal Turner, or are you simply using your badge to conduct an illegal search?" Turner stepped closer, looming over her. "I don't need a warrant to investigate a crime in progress." "Step aside, Miss Fraser." "Grace." Ethan's voice was stronger now, urgent. "Let them search. There's nothing to find anymore." She glanced at him, reading the message in his eyes. Everyone who needed protection had already been evacuated. Fighting now would only endanger those who remained. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, watching as Turner's men swarmed toward the house and outbuildings. Silas and Miguel, who had been waiting near the barn, were roughly searched and then held at gunpoint. "Your loyalty is admirable, Miss Fraser," Turner said, studying her reaction. "Misplaced, but admirable. Oberlin here has quite a talent for inspiring devotion in others, particularly women. My wife fell under his spell as well." "Your wife made her own choices," Grace replied evenly, "as have I and my sisters." "Ah yes, your sisters." Turner's smile widened unpleasantly. "I look forward to meeting them properly. Perhaps they'll be more cooperative than you." The thinly veiled threat made Grace's blood boil, but before she could respond, one of Turner's deputies emerged from the house. "Marshal, there's no one inside except for two women in the kitchen and an older couple. No sign of any fugitives or your wife and kids." Turner frowned, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Check the barn, the corrals, all the outbuildings. They have to be somewhere." As the search continued with increasing frustration among Turner's men, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Grace remained standing near Ethan, who had been forced to his knees in the dust, his good arm tied behind his back. "Are you all right?" she whispered when Turner stepped away to confer with his deputies. "Been better," Ethan managed, the ghost of a smile touching his battered face. "You should have left," and missed seeing the marshal's face when he realized his prey had escaped. "Never." Ethan's smile widened slightly, then winced as it pulled at his split lip. "Careful, Grace. Turner's a dangerous man, especially when cornered." "So am I," she replied with quiet intensity. "He's not taking you or anyone else from Circolo without a fight." Before Ethan could respond, Turner returned, his expression thunderous. "The property's clear, no sign of any fugitives." He grabbed Ethan by the hair, yanking his head back. "Where are they, Oberlin? Where have you hidden them?" "Gone," Ethan replied with surprising calm. "Well beyond your reach by now, including Rebecca and the children. You've lost, Turner. Accept it." The marshal's face contorted with rage. He drew his pistol and pressed it to Ethan's temple. "Tell me where they are, or I'll put a bullet in your head right here." "No," Grace cried, lunging forward only to be caught and restrained by one of Turner's men. "You can't just execute him." "I can claim he resisted arrest," Turner snarled, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "Who would question a marshal's word against that of a criminal?" "Everyone in this county would question it," came a new voice from the edge of the yard. All heads turned to see a group of riders approaching, led by an elderly man in a fine suit. Grace recognized him as Judge Harrington from the county seat, one of the guests at their dinner party weeks earlier. "Judge Harrington," Turner said, lowering his gun slightly but not holstering it. "This doesn't concern you. When a U.S. Marshal conducts an armed raid in my jurisdiction without notifying my court, it very much concerns me," the judge replied, dismounting with the aid of a younger man Grace recognized as the county sheriff. "Especially when that marshal has been suspended from duty pending an investigation into abuse of power." A murmur ran through Turner's men, several of whom exchanged uneasy glances. "What investigation?" Turner demanded. "I've received no such notification." "Perhaps because you've been too busy conducting illegal raids across 3 counties, the sheriff suggested, moving to stand beside the judge. "We've had telegrams from Dallas, Fort Worth, and as far east as Shreveport reporting similar actions by you and your men." "Actions undertaken without proper warrants or jurisdiction." Turner's face flushed with anger. "I'm pursuing fugitives from justice." "You're pursuing your wife and children, whom a court in Pine Ridge granted a legal separation from you 3 months ago due to documented abuse," Judge Harrington corrected him. "A fact you conveniently omitted when recruiting these men to your cause." Several of Turner's deputies looked distinctly uncomfortable at this revelation. "Sheriff Mason here has warrants for your arrest on charges of assault, false imprisonment, and exceeding your authority," the judge continued. "I suggest you surrender your weapon and come peacefully." For a tense moment, it seemed Turner might resist. His finger tightened on the trigger of the gun still pressed against Ethan's head. Grace held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Then, slowly, Turner lowered the pistol and handed it butt first to the sheriff. "This isn't over," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not by a long shot." As the sheriff placed Turner in handcuffs, Judge Harrington turned to the deputies and hired guns. "As for the rest of you, you have a choice. Those who genuinely believed they were upholding the law can depart now without charges. Those who knowingly participated in these illegal acts will face prosecution." The majority of the men quickly mounted their horses and rode off, leaving only Turner and 3 others who were placed under arrest by Sheriff Mason, and the deputies who had accompanied the judge. Grace rushed to Ethan's side as soon as Turner was secured in the sheriff's wagon. With trembling hands, she untied the rope binding his good arm and helped him to his feet. "How did the judge know to come?" she asked, supporting Ethan as he swayed slightly. "Miguel," Ethan explained, his voice strained with pain. "When we saw Turner's posse approaching on the road, I sent him to fetch the judge. Harrington has been a quiet supporter of our work for years." "You need a doctor," Grace said, noticing the increasing pallor of his face. "Your arm." "Broken, I think," Ethan admitted. Turner's men were thorough in their persuasion techniques. Judge Harrington approached them, his expression concerned. "Mr. Oberlin, you look terrible. Dr. Collins is in town. I can send a rider." "Thank you, Judge," Grace replied before Ethan could refuse. "We would be most grateful." As the judge moved away to dispatch a rider, Gabriella and Georgina emerged from the house, rushing to join their sister. "Is it over?" Georgina asked, her eyes wide with relief and lingering fear. "Are they really gone?" "It's over," Grace confirmed, still supporting Ethan's weight against her side. "Help me get him inside. He needs to lie down until the doctor arrives." Together, the sisters managed to get Ethan into the house and settled on a sofa in the parlor. Martha Holliday appeared with clean cloths and a basin of water to tend to his visible injuries while they awaited the doctor's arrival. "You were magnificent," Ethan murmured to Grace as she gently cleaned the blood from his face. "Standing up to Turner like that, I've never seen anything braver." Grace smiled softly, her heart full of emotions she could no longer deny. "I couldn't let him hurt you, not when I've only just found you." Ethan's eyes, despite the pain clouding them, brightened at her words. He reached up with his uninjured hand to touch her cheek. "Grace Fraser, you continue to amaze me." "As you do me, Ethan Oberlin," she replied, covering his hand with her own. "Rest now. We have time for everything else." Dr. Sarah Collins arrived an hour later, confirming that Ethan's arm was indeed broken along with 2 ribs. She set the bone and wrapped his torso tightly, prescribing rest and a regimen of willow bark tea for the pain. "He'll heal," she assured Grace as they stood outside Ethan's bedroom after the treatment was complete. "He's strong and healthy, but he'll need care for several weeks." "He'll have it," Grace promised. "We're not going anywhere." In the days that followed, news spread throughout the county of Marshall Turner's arrest and the exposure of his campaign of intimidation. Judge Harrington, true to his word, ensured that the legal proceedings against Turner were swift and transparent, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence for the disgraced lawman. Gradually, those who had fled the circle before Turner's arrival began to return, including Sela's and Martha's grown son and his family, who had been living in one of the network's safe houses in New Mexico. A letter arrived from Rebecca Turner, now using a new name, thanking Ethan and the Fraser sisters for their help, and reporting that she and her children were settling well into their new life far from her ex-husband's reach. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in gold and crimson, Ethan's physical recovery progressed steadily under Grace's attentive care. They spent long hours together, their conversations ranging from practical ranch matters to deeper philosophical discussions about justice, redemption, and the future. One evening in early November, with Ethan's arm finally free of its splint, he invited Grace to walk with him to a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange, casting a golden glow over the circle below. "It's beautiful," Grace said, drawing her shawl closer against the cooling air. "It is," Ethan agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the landscape. "Grace, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "Yes." When I bought you and your sisters at that auction, I thought I was offering you employment, a chance to rebuild your lives. I never expected. Never expected what? Grace prompted gently when he hesitated. I never expected to find someone who would understand what I'm trying to do here. Someone who would share not just in the work but in the vision. He took her hand, his touch warm against her skin. Someone I would come to care for so deeply that the thought of a future without her is unbearable. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Ethan. I know it hasn't been long, he continued, his blue eyes earnest in the fading light. And perhaps this is too soon. But when Turner had that gun to my head, all I could think about was you, the things I hadn't said, the future we hadn't had a chance to build together. He reached into his pocket with his still stiff left hand and withdrew a small velvet pouch. This belonged to my mother. I'd like it to belong to you now if you'll have it. And me. From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Grace Fraser, I love you. Will you marry me? Tears filled Grace's eyes as emotion swelled in her chest. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Ethan Oberlin, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as it caught the last rays of the setting sun, Grace thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. Ethan pulled her close, his kiss tender yet filled with a promise of the passion and partnership that awaited them. When they finally broke apart, Grace laughed softly. My sisters will be delighted. Georgina has been predicting this outcome since our first week here. And Gabriella? Ethan asked, keeping an arm around Grace's waist as they began walking back toward the house. Gabriella is more practical. She's been planning the wedding menu since the day you faced down Turner for us. Ethan's laughter joined hers, carrying across the peaceful ranch below. Then we shouldn't disappoint them. How soon can we make their predictions come true? Christmas would be perfect, Grace suggested, her heart light with happiness. A new beginning as the year ends. Christmas it is, Ethan agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. The first of many we'll share at Circle O. The wedding of Ethan Oberlin and Grace Fraser took place on Christmas Eve, 1873, in the parlor of the Circle O Ranch. Judge Harrington presided over the ceremony, which was attended by the ranch's residents and a select group of friends who had supported Ethan's work over the years. Gabriella, true to her nature, prepared a feast that would be remembered for years to come, while Georgina transformed the house with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that filled the rooms with a warm, golden glow. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha Holliday had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Georgina had meticulously sewn by hand. In her hair, she wore a wreath of winter berries and dried flowers, and around her neck hung a gold locket that had belonged to her mother, the one treasure the sisters had managed to keep when everything else was sold. Ethan, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, watched with undisguised adoration as Grace walked toward him on Silas Holliday's arm. His eyes never left hers as they exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Harrington declared with evident satisfaction. Mr. Oberlin, you may kiss your bride. The kiss they shared was both tender and triumphant, sealing a union that had been forged through adversity and strengthened by shared purpose and deep affection. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music provided by Miguel and several other ranch hands who played guitar and fiddle. Georgina danced with so many partners that her cheeks were flushed pink with exertion and happiness, while Gabriella received numerous compliments on her cooking, including an offer from a visiting rancher to hire her as his personal chef, an offer she politely declined. "My place is here with my sisters," she told Grace when recounting the conversation. "At least for now." As the hour grew late and the festivities began to wind down, Ethan drew Grace away from the gathering and into the quiet of his now their study. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Though I do have one regret." Ethan pulled back slightly to look at her with concern. "What's that?" "That our father never got to see this day. Despite his faults, I think he would have been pleased to see us so well settled." "I'm sure he would be proud of all three of you," Ethan said gently. "You've shown remarkable strength and grace in the face of circumstances that would have broken many." Grace smiled at the unintentional pun on her name. "Speaking of my sisters, I have something I want to discuss with you." "Anything," Ethan replied, leading her to sit beside him on the leather sofa near the fireplace. "I've been thinking about the future of Circle O and its mission," Grace began, choosing her words carefully. "The work you do helping people escape difficult situations is important, vital, even. I want to expand it." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "In what way?" "What if, instead of just providing temporary sanctuary, we could help people establish permanent new lives? Education for children who have never had the opportunity to attend school, training in useful trades for adults, a fresh start in the truest sense." "That would require resources beyond what we currently have," Ethan noted, though his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Yes, but not beyond what we could develop," Grace countered eagerly. "The horse breeding operation is already successful and growing. With proper investment and management, it could support a much larger mission." "You've given this a lot of thought," Ethan observed with a smile. "I have. And Gabriella and Georgina want to be part of it too." "Gabriella has already started teaching Rebecca's children to read and write through letters, and Georgina has a gift for helping people feel safe and valued." Ethan took her hand, his expression growing serious. "Grace, nothing would make me happier than building this future with you and your sisters. It's a bigger vision than I dared to imagine on my own. Together, we can make it real," Grace said confidently. "Start small, perhaps with a proper schoolroom for the children who pass through, and grow from there." "Mrs. Oberlin," Ethan said with mock formality that couldn't hide the pride and love in his voice, "I believe you've just outlined the next chapter for Circle O Ranch. And I, for one, can't wait to see it unfold." Their kiss sealed not just their marriage but a shared commitment to a future built on compassion, justice, and the unshakable bond of family, both the one they had found in each other and the extended family they would create through their work. Epilogue: 5 years later, the spring sunshine filtered through the newly leafed trees surrounding the Circle O Ranch, casting dappled shadows across the expanded compound. What had once been a modest ranch house, with a few outbuildings, had grown into a thriving community. New cabins dotted the landscape, housing both permanent residents and those passing through on their way to new beginnings. A sturdy schoolhouse stood near the main house, its windows open to catch the breeze as children's voices recited their lessons inside. On the wide porch of the main house, Grace Oberlin sat in a rocking chair, a ledger balanced on her rounded belly as she reviewed the ranch's quarterly accounts. At 33, motherhood had softened her features while experience had added a quiet authority to her bearing. Her honey blonde hair was swept up in a practical knot, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her face. The sound of galloping hooves drew her attention to the main road, where a rider approached at speed. Shading her eyes against the sun, Grace recognized the distinctive posture of her husband even at a distance. Ethan always rode with the same straight-backed confidence, a habit from his cavalry days that had never left him. Closing the ledger, Grace set it aside and rose to greet him, one hand resting on her 7-month pregnant belly. Their first child, 4-year-old Daniel, was currently in the schoolhouse with his Aunt Georgina, who had discovered a natural talent for teaching and now served as the ranch's schoolmistress. Ethan dismounted in a fluid motion that belied his 38 years, handing the reins to a waiting stable boy before striding toward the house. His face broke into a wide smile at the sight of Grace on the porch. "You're supposed to be resting," he chided gently as he climbed the steps to kiss her. "I was resting," Grace countered, returning his kiss with affection. "Resting and working are not mutually exclusive activities." Ethan laughed, placing a hand on her belly just in time to feel a strong kick. "Active today, isn't she? She takes after her father," Grace replied with a smile. They had decided this child was a girl, though they wouldn't know for certain until the birth. Always in motion, never content to sit still. They moved to the porch swing, sitting close together as Ethan shared news from his trip to Austin. The state legislature had passed a bill that would make it easier for women to claim legal separation from abusive husbands, a cause that Ethan and Grace had lobbied for extensively over the past 2 years. "Judge Harrington sends his regards," Ethan added. "He's planning to visit next month when he makes his circuit. Says he wants to see how much Daniel has grown since Christmas. The judge has become quite the doting honorary grandfather," Grace observed with a smile. "Did you stop in town?" Gabriella was expecting a shipment of spices for the new training kitchen. "I did, and the spices are in my saddlebag, along with letters for you and Georgina." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and produced several envelopes, including one from Rebecca. Grace took the letters eagerly. Rebecca Turner, now Rebecca Marshall, wrote regularly from her home in Santa Fe, where she had established a small but successful dressmaking business. Her children, now nearly teenagers, were thriving in their new life, free from the shadow of their abusive father. "How is our newest arrival settling in?" Ethan asked, referring to a young woman who had arrived at the ranch the previous week, fleeing an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. "Emma is doing well," Grace reported. "She's taken to helping Gabriella in the kitchen. Turns out she has quite a talent for baking." "Another success story for Gabriella's culinary training program," Ethan said proudly. "Has she mentioned the offer from the hotel in Denver again?" Grace shook her head. "No, but I think she's considering it. She deserves the opportunity to run her own kitchen, even if we would miss her terribly." Gabriella had received an offer to become the head chef at a prestigious new hotel in Denver, a position that would allow her to showcase the skills she had honed over the past 5 years. Though she hadn't made a decision yet, both Grace and Ethan supported whatever choice she made. "And what about Thomas?" Ethan asked with a knowing smile. "Has he finally worked up the courage to speak to Gabriella about his feelings?" Grace laughed softly. "Not yet, though he brings her wildflowers every morning for the breakfast table. I think he's waiting for her decision about Denver before declaring himself." Thomas Hayes, the ranch's blacksmith, had been quietly in love with Gabriella for nearly 2 years. Everyone on the ranch knew it except, apparently, Gabriella herself. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the schoolhouse bell, signaling the end of the day's lessons. Moments later, the door burst open and a stream of children emerged, ranging in age from 5 to 16. Among them was Daniel Oberlin, his dark hair and blue eyes a perfect blend of his parents' features. "Papa," he shouted, spotting Ethan on the porch and racing toward the house with the boundless energy of childhood. "You're home." Ethan rose to catch his son in mid-leap, swinging him up into a hug that made the boy giggle with delight. I am indeed, and I brought you something from Austin. Daniel's eyes widened with anticipation. What is it? A book about wild horses, Ethan said, setting the boy down and retrieving a package from his saddlebag. With illustrations by that artist you admire. While Daniel exclaimed over his gift, Georgina emerged from the schoolhouse, a basket of papers under one arm as she bid farewell to the last of her students. At 23, she had blossomed from a shy girl into a confident young woman, her natural compassion finding its perfect outlet in teaching the children who came to Circle O. Ethan, you're back earlier than expected, she called, crossing the yard to join them on the porch. How was Austin? Productive, he replied, giving his sister-in-law a warm hug. The bill passed, and I've brought letters, including one from that admirer of yours in San Antonio. Georgina blushed prettily. Mr. Wilson is a business associate, not an admirer. A business associate who has visited 3 times in the past year and writes weekly letters, Grace teased gently. I think his interest extends beyond our educational program, dear sister. Andrew Wilson was a wealthy San Antonio businessman who had become one of Circle O's most generous supporters after Georgina gave a presentation about their work at a charity gathering in the city. His increasingly frequent visits and correspondence had not gone unnoticed by the Oberlin household. Perhaps, Georgina admitted, her blush deepening. But unlike some, I'm in no hurry to change my circumstances. I'm quite content here with all of you and my students. The conversation might have continued in this vein had dinner not been announced by Martha Holliday, who had remained at Circle O even after Silas's passing 2 years earlier. Now in her 60s, she served as a house mother to the young women who came to the ranch seeking sanctuary and a fresh start. That evening, as was tradition at Circle O, everyone gathered in the expanded dining room for the evening meal. Besides the Oberlins, Gabriella and Georgina, there were 12 current guests ranging in age from 4 to 50, plus the permanent staff that had grown to include a doctor, a carpenter, and several teachers who rotated between Circle O and similar sanctuaries that had been established across Texas and neighboring territories. As Grace looked around the table, listening to the hum of conversation and watching Ethan interact with their son, and the others with the same gentle authority that had first drawn her to him, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had begun as a desperate situation, 3 sisters sold separately at auction had transformed into a life of purpose, love, and family in the truest sense of the word. Later that night, as she and Ethan prepared for bed, Grace shared this reflection with her husband. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't been in Sweetwater Creek that day? She asked, brushing out her hair at the dressing table. Ethan, who had been reading by the lamp near the bed, set his book aside. Sometimes. But then, I remember something my mother used to say. What's meant to be will find a way. He crossed the room to stand behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. I believe we were meant to find each other, Grace. Perhaps not in those exact circumstances, but somehow, some way, our paths would have crossed. Grace reached up to cover one of his hands with her own. A romantic notion from such a practical man. You've had that effect on me, Ethan admitted with a smile, bending to press a kiss to the top of her head, making me believe in possibilities I never considered before. Like the possibility of changing lives beyond just offering temporary shelter, Grace said, thinking of the dozens of people who had passed through Circle O and gone on to build new, better lives for themselves. Exactly. Ethan helped her rise from the dressing table and guided her to their bed. Together, we've created something neither of us could have achieved alone. As they settled beneath the quilts, Ethan's hand coming to rest protectively over their unborn child, Grace thought about her sisters, each finding her own path to fulfillment. Gabriella through her culinary skills that nourished both body and soul. Georgina through her teaching that opened minds and hearts to new possibilities. "I love you, Ethan Oberlin," she murmured, nestling closer to his warmth. "Thank you for giving us not just a home but a purpose." "I love you too, Grace Oberlin," he replied, his voice deep with emotion. "And the purpose was always there within you. I just provided the space for it to grow." Outside their window, the Texas night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional distant lowing of cattle. The Circle O Ranch slept peacefully, a haven of hope in the vast expanse of the frontier. And within its boundaries, three sisters who had once faced separation and an uncertain future now lived lives rich with meaning, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family, both the one they had been born to and the larger one they had helped to create. In the years to come, the Circle O would continue to evolve, touching hundreds more lives as its reputation grew. But at its heart would always remain the story of a wealthy cowboy who bought three sisters at auction, reuniting them, and in doing so, finding his own place in a family bound not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love that had proven stronger than any adversity life could present.